Okay, 2 minutes on prep. Okay, cool. Let's chat. What are your thoughts?
I just spent some time thinking about government's burden, right? They had to set up a system. We don't know if we had to set it up properly and make sure countries actually opt in. I assume most countries won't opt in. The system won't work then. I was trying to think of why it might be counterproductive. Maybe you lose opt in to just climate negotiation in general, lose money to the new loss and damage fund created by the COP in Indonesia. Maybe something about pushing countries towards China and rare earth minerals. But yeah, we could also run principal lines. So I just focused on direct responses to governments.
Yeah, because extraterritoriality is, universal jurisdiction is essentially what extraterritorial punishment of crimes against the environment, which is a slightly undefined concept, which basically just means if you are a palm oil company in Indonesia and you fuck up a rainforest, people in the Netherlands can come after you.
Yes.
Is there anything more to it?
I mean, it depends on how they set it up, right? Because like, what's the enforcement mechanism on a lot of these companies / countries? It has to be it has to be an opt-in situation, otherwise you can't invade a country.
Well, let's just mess up extradition.
No, I think you're thinking too far. Like, the extradition laws won't work unless there is some treaty that they've opted into, right?
Well, most countries already have pre-existing extradition treaties.
But for specific treaties.
Most of them don't go. Most of them aren't that specific. So for instance, like if you prosecute someone, like if you commit a crime in South Korea, and then you come back to New Zealand, it can there are different places have. I think the point that we just want to make here is that cooperation is very important, and we think a lot of people will pull out of these arrangements because of the dramatically changed burden. Okay,
that setup kind of helps us, right? If it's really broad and extradition just applies because of treaties, then you would not even want to sign the treaty in the first place.
Yeah, but I think the problem is that you're right. People would just create carve-outs. I don't think it will affect extradition broadly. I think what it affects is just cooperation is very important. So what are other bodies with universal jurisdiction? ICC. So it's literally this debate is just literally ICC for.
ICC's bad as well.
Yeah, well, ICC's fucked. So I think the major debate or the major harm in the debate is like, are we able to effectively prevent environmental crimes, crimes against the environment? Because how are crimes against the environment currently prosecuted domestically?
Domestically, I mean, countries legislate what a crime against the environment might be. I don't think
I've actually got a really cool argument. So this takes away a lot of incentives for strengthening of local enforcement. So basically, the approach that universal jurisdiction assumes is that we should cast aside domestic resolution of these issues in order for internationalized. And I think that's actually the way we frame it, just being like, we accept in this debate that environmental crimes are a big problem. We need to target them. The comparative in this debate is whether or not you invest in domestic systems and put pressure on countries to pass legislation that clearly defines this, rather than relying on some Dutch court to go after shell execs. What is the mutual exclusivity there?
Just kind of like path dependency stuff, right? Like when you have this already set up.
Well, I think maybe the distinction is it'll really piss off the developing world. And then the debate is just like, maybe the whole debate is just what gets the developing world on side for prosecuting. And so I think then our points are pretty simple. Why developing world cooperation is the only thing that prevents crimes against the environment. And then the second is, why does this prevent cooperation?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of our pathway to victory. Is there anything more complex?
Well, there's like China, right?
Yeah. And then I think of a third thing we say is what, like flow-on effects of worsening this relationship? Because then that's like China.
Yeah, outcomes. That's kind of part of the developing country point, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
So, but no borrowing a principal point, right? Like,
well, the principal point is kind of folded in because the developing nations believe in the principle, and that's why they did stuff like pass the Bangkok Declaration.
Yeah. So, I can handle why it's essential. Why the developing world won't opt in. If you can think of some next there, I'll just fill in the gaps of the rest of them.
What was the name of the fund that's just been
loss and damage? So I think that's the best way to get developing countries on side, is to show them that they have some sort of mitigation money coming in. But it's small, and we need to find the mutual exclusivity here as to why this is going to be the tipping point that means they aren't going to collaborate, basically.
Will this lead to a lot of infighting in the West?
Why?
We'll just say the US won't prosecute people aggressively. They'll get really annoyed at Denmark and Europe for trying
double
to prosecute these
standards,
people.
right?
Yeah, well, it basically really clearly exposes the double standard, and we just say that's an unproductive thing to expose. And of course, they'll come back and say, well, this is how you reconcile.
It looks like the ICC only prosecuting African.
Maybe we can point about how it freaks out China. It's like really freaks out China. Like that is our, so not only, so I think this the second point, why does it prevent cooperation? What essentially we explained here is that it drives a wedge between developing world and developed world. And developed world countries against each other. And we can bring in stuff about the carbon border adjustment mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can just say that solves most of this.
Well, it's also kind of doing the exact same thing, right? So you need to be careful. Because that also
well, it's not about interfering in another country. It's about your consumption decisions. And we say that's like a, well, maybe we could just claim that the CBAM is like a really popular. Because CBAM is not, maybe the way we frame this is just like the developing world has been really angry at the developed world for basically doing greenwashing. So doing high profile criticism of the developing world while of course consuming most of the things that are drawing the things. And maybe we can just say, this is why the developing world has been relatively favorable to stuff like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because it actually targets climate change where it needs to be targeted, which is with Western consumers. And obviously it's still, they'll push us back and say, well, obviously it's still net negative for the developing world because now they have less of an environmental comparative advantage. But we say, firstly, it allows for much greater standardization. So a lot of these nations want to be better for the environment because they bear the effects of it, but can't because of race to the bottom kind of stuff. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Do you have any other reasons why?
I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. Well, I mean, the point is basically that the developing world is really wary of big like Western projects that seek to violate sovereignty and go after a very small amount of like developing world actors. Oh, maybe another thing we say is that the whole definition of crime against environment fail to appropriately weigh the trade-off between necessary harms to the environment and economic growth.
Yeah,
like it's a very like singular thing, right? Crimes against the humanity, not how do we, and that's why CBAM is probably like a way better framework for it.
Do you have any other reasons why?
So the first point is
not going to opt in.
Not going to opt in because it doesn't allow them to make effective trade-offs between the needs of their people and the environmental consequences.
Yep.
So it'll tend to be applied in like a really weird way. It's like our whole case is just it's not developing world led.
Yeah.
China will be really afraid that this is a way to start going after its own execs.
Yeah. No, I think that China point is really good.
China and India,
pushes the.
So I think the first point is actually just rebuttal, just being like the system will not work unless you get the developing world on board because they will not extradite people. And like the chains of accountability make it really difficult to figure out who is like responsible for the crime. Like I don't really know how this will work.
That's why it's very unclear because the crimes against the environment, the clearest ones are like over deforestation and overfishing, that kind of thing. The harder ones, it's emissions in general, is really hard to see where the harm came from and what you're going to prosecute. So they can't. Don't let them get away with that.
Like, do you think like failing to?
By the way, I'm taking a point from opening. Closing won't give me the extension, so you did closing.
Yeah. This is criminal jurisdiction, which means it's targeting individuals. So I think that's another thing to say. Like this is a criminalized approach to environmental. Okay, so if we break down what we're talking about, I think the themes we want to hit are preventing cooperation. That's the major one, with all the flow and effects of that, and then the reasons why it does preventing cooperation, the reasons why it does this. Oh, I mean, I actually think it's more than that because then there's like the criminalization as like a simplistic approach. Maybe I'll extend on that.
Yeah. We're cutting out domestic legislation. You can do that.
Yeah. Maybe there's like that's like
you extend on that. Yeah.
I think I'll fold that into the preventing cooperation point. Maybe like this is eco-carceralism. Like it doesn't address the root causes of issues and just takes a couple of high-profile offenders. Yeah, and maybe we would just be like it's just greenwashing. Greenwashing in comparison to like the CBAM or loss and damage fund. Yeah.
So what are the outcomes, the consequences of? Oh yeah, we should go.
Sorry, what was that?
We can end the recording and chat.